In China's Han Dynasty, betrayal carried a terrifying price. Emperor Liang, a ruler obsessed with loyalty and control, created a chilling system to punish spies. Suspected traitors didn't just face imprisonment, they lost their body parts preserved in crystal jars for all to see. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button so this video reaches more history fans. Your support helps us continue exploring more content like this. Let's get started. Emperor Liang of the Eastern Han Court emerged during a period marked by administrative weakness and increasing regional competition. His rise was supported by a small circle of legalist advisors who believed strict governance could restore order. The imperial capital viewed him as a stabilizing choice during a turbulent succession. Born into a secondary branch of the Liu imperial clan, Liang lacked the early privileges enjoyed by direct heirs. His family maintained moderate influence through military service rather than court politics. This background shaped his belief that authority had to be constantly reinforced to remain effective. During his youth, Liang studied statecraft and administrative texts instead of literature or poetry. His instructors were mid-ranking officials who taught him practical governance rather than ceremonial etiquette. These early lessons reinforced his preference for measurable control over symbolic power. When he entered court as a young prince, Liang found a bureaucracy strained by corruption and factional interests. Senior officials competed for imperial favor through flattery instead of performance. This environment convinced Liang that loyalty within the palace required institutional pressure rather than trust. His accession to the throne followed an illness that weakened the aging emperor. Liang was selected partly because he lacked strong alliances, making him easier for various factions to accept. Once crowned, he began restructuring court offices with unusual speed for a new emperor. Liang appointed inspectors whose duty was to audit the behavior of regional governors. These inspectors reported directly to him instead of following traditional chains of command. Centralized reporting strengthened the emperor's ability to monitor distant territories. He implemented new requirements for record-keeping across the provinces. Local magistrates had to submit monthly reports documenting tax collection, disputes, and administrative actions. This system allowed Liang's council to detect irregularities more effectively. The emperor also reorganized the inner palace by reducing ceremonial staff and expanding administrative roles. He believed the palace should function as a political center rather than a cultural symbol. These changes made the court more efficient but less hospitable to traditional courtiers. Liang's emphasis on oversight led him to expand the role of eunuch officials. Eunuchs were valued because they lacked family ties that could create competing loyalties. Under his rule, they became essential intermediaries between the emperor and the bureaucracy. He strengthened the northern border by reinforcing watchtowers and revising troop allocation. His strategic policy relied on rapid communication and consistent rotation of soldiers to prevent complacency. The military respected the discipline he demanded, even if they found it restrictive. Liang introduced standardized training routines for all new recruits. Commanders no longer had full freedom over the drills they used. This policy created more uniform performance across garrisons, but reduced the influence of individual officers. Agricultural policy under Emperor Liang focused on stabilizing grain supply rather than expanding farmland. He promoted irrigation repairs and required local administrations to maintain reservoirs. These developments reduced crop failures during moderate drought conditions. Liang established a small network of state-run granaries in regions vulnerable to shortages. These granaries stored surplus harvests purchased at regulated prices. During lean seasons, the reserves helped keep food prices from rising uncontrollably. In the legal system, Liang enforced clearer definitions for administrative misconduct. Previously, vague laws had allowed officials to escape punishment through interpretation. His reforms specified penalties for each category of negligence or corruption. The emperor encouraged a system of anonymous reporting within offices. Clerks could submit sealed statements describing wrongdoing without revealing their identities. Liang believed this method exposed misconduct that would otherwise remain hidden. His reliance on detailed information created an atmosphere where accuracy was valued over personal reputation. Officials focused on documentation and compliance with procedure. This bureaucratic culture made the administration more predictable, but also more rigid. Liang expanded the imperial archives to store the growing volume of reports. He commissioned skilled scribes to maintain chronologically ordered records based on consistent formats. The archives became a central source for evaluating provincial performance. In foreign relations, Emperor Liang adhered to calculated restraint. He authorized diplomatic exchanges when they served economic or strategic interests. He discouraged unnecessary military campaigns that could weaken internal stability. Trade along the Silk Road remained active under his rule because he prioritized security along major routes. Bandit groups received increased surveillance, and escorts were assigned to vulnerable caravans. Merchants viewed his policies as steady and reliable. Liang strengthened the authority of the censorate, the institution responsible for monitoring official conduct. Censors gained broader rights to investigate governors, military officers, and financial managers. Their findings required immediate review by the emperor. The emperor preferred written communication over verbal meetings with provincial leaders. He believed written documents reduced misinterpretation and prevented manipulation. His habit of relying on written channels increased the volume of correspondence within the court. Liang introduced examinations for mid-level officials. Focusing on administrative knowledge rather than classical literature, he aimed to cultivate a bureaucracy with practical skills aligned with his governing style. This shifted the balance of power toward technocrats rather than traditional scholars. Though the emperor valued order, he did not ignore public welfare entirely. He promoted basic medical facilities in the capital to reduce mortality during seasonal illnesses. These facilities reflected his belief that healthy populations strengthened the state. His taxation policies were stable and moderate. He avoided sudden increases that could disrupt rural households. Instead, he emphasized consistent collection and scrutiny of tax records to prevent fraud. Liang demanded clear accountability within every department. Ministers were required to submit annual self-evaluations, outlining successes and failures. This practice encouraged precise reporting, but also heightened anxiety among officials. The emperor maintained strong control over the palace guard. He rotated commanders regularly to prevent the formation of personal power bases. This helped him maintain a stable environment within the imperial residence. Liang's relationship with scholars was cautious. He respected their knowledge, but viewed excessive philosophical influence as a risk to unity. He allowed academic debates, but restricted their involvement in state decisions. The emperor cultivated a reputation for impartiality in resolving disputes among his ministers. Decisions were based on documented evidence rather than seniority. This approach improved administrative fairness, but reduced the influence of long-serving officials. His personal habits reflected his governing style. Liang preferred minimal ceremony and focused on reviewing documents late into the night. His dedication impressed loyal ministers, but limited opportunities for open discussion. Despite the strictness of his administration, Liang avoided unnecessary cruelty in his early reign. Punishments followed established legal frameworks without excessive severity. This created a controlled environment without widespread fear among the population. However, the emperor's reliance on surveillance gradually expanded. He authorized additional funding for intelligence gathering within the court and across the provinces. These networks provided him with information beyond official reports. Liang believed that absolute awareness was essential for maintaining stability. This belief marked a shift in his approach to governance, emphasizing prevention over reaction. The desire for certainty shaped the policies he developed in the later years of his rule. As intelligence operations grew, so did his interest in methods for verifying the reliability of information. He required cross-referencing between reports from different offices. Discrepancies prompted immediate investigation. By the midpoint of his reign, Emperor Liang had consolidated considerable authority over officials, soldiers, and administrators. The structure he built functioned efficiently, though it allowed little flexibility. The empire operated according to his precise expectations. The emperor's growing focus on internal monitoring defined the final stage of his early rule. His administrative system now extended into nearly every aspect of government activity. This foundation set the stage for the more intrusive practices he developed in later years. Liang considered internal security the most essential component of governance. He believed threats to the state often arose not from external enemies, but from disloyal individuals within the administration. This conviction guided the next phase of his policies. The emperor's interest in information control grew steadily as he sought deeper oversight of officials and court members. The structures he created would eventually shape the most controversial aspects of his reign. These developments unfold in the next episode. Emperor Liang's interest in internal security gradually evolved into strict measures to enforce loyalty. He developed a specialized system for handling suspected spies and disloyal officials. This system combined intelligence gathering, interrogation, and severe physical punishment. Officials accused of misconduct were first subjected to careful observation. Reports from multiple sources were compared before any action was taken. Liang prioritized confirmation over accusation, ensuring that punishment targeted genuine threats. The emperor established a bureau within the palace responsible for intelligence and counterintelligence. Agents monitored both provincial officials and palace attendants. Their primary goal was to detect betrayal or conspiracies before they could escalate. Once an individual was suspected of espionage or treason, they were detained in a private chamber within the palace. Detainees were separated from the general prison population to prevent information leaks. This ensured that investigations could proceed discreetly. Interrogations were methodical and highly structured. Officials recorded statements, verified alibis, and conducted cross-examinations. The process aimed to extract confessions without allowing suspects to manipulate information. Emperor Liang introduced a form of punishment designed to serve as a warning to others. Those found guilty of espionage faced removal of their eyes. The procedure was performed in controlled conditions by trained specialists. The extracted eyes were not simply discarded. Liang ordered that they be preserved in crystal jars, a process requiring careful cleaning and preparation. The jars were sealed to maintain transparency and prevent decay. These preserved eyes were displayed in a private section of the palace known as the Garden of Eyes. The location was highly restricted, accessible only to select court officials and imperial inspectors. The display was intended to demonstrate the consequences of disloyalty. The Garden of Eyes was arranged systematically. Each jar was labeled with the name, rank, and offense of the individual. Emperor Liang believed that documenting the punishment reinforced accountability and discouraged speculation. In addition to physical punishment, detainees faced psychological measures. Isolation, forced memorization of confessions, and regular review of their statements were common. The emperor's goal was to reinforce submission and prevent repetition of offenses. Local officials were aware of the emperor's methods. Reports indicate that the fear of detection and the potential for extreme punishment encouraged self-regulation among administrators. Many preferred strict compliance over risk. The legal framework for these punishments was codified under Liang's supervision. Manuals outlined offenses, procedures for interrogation, and preservation techniques for the removed eyes. This codification ensured that punishment was applied uniformly. Specialists trained in handling the delicate process of eye removal were highly valued. They were usually eunuchs or palace surgeons who had demonstrated precision in other medical or surgical procedures. Accuracy was considered essential to prevent unnecessary suffering or mistakes. The Garden of Eyes also functioned as a reference for intelligence officers. By examining past cases, inspectors could identify patterns in disloyal behavior. This allowed Liang's network to anticipate potential threats more effectively. Emperor Liang believed that the visibility of consequences strengthened internal stability. Even though access to the garden was limited, knowledge of its existence circulated among palace officials. This indirect exposure reinforced loyalty. Punishment extended to family members in cases where espionage involved organized plots. Relatives might be interrogated or removed from office to prevent retaliation. These measures reflected the emperor's belief in collective responsibility. Documentation in the garden included not only the preserved eyes, but also written records of the investigation. These detailed the charges, evidence, interrogation notes, and outcomes. Liang considered thorough record-keeping essential for maintaining historical accuracy. The use of crystal jars was significant. Transparency allowed inspectors to see the physical evidence without handling it directly. Liang believed that visible proof of punishment had a stronger deterrent effect than verbal warnings alone. Officials who served as witnesses to the garden's display were required to swear oaths of secrecy. Disclosure of the collection's location or contents without permission was treated as a grave offense. The emperor emphasized confidentiality to protect the authority of the punishment system. Some detainees were executed after eye removal, while others were returned to provincial duties under strict surveillance. Liang's decisions were guided by assessments of loyalty, the severity of the offense, and political considerations. The Garden of Eyes became an instrument of imperial power. It exemplified the intersection of surveillance, discipline, and psychological control within Liang's administration. Its existence reinforced the emperor's perception of ultimate authority over life, loyalty, and governance. The display also served a ceremonial function during inspections. Imperial auditors and select envoys were sometimes shown the jars as a demonstration of discipline. This reinforced the centralized authority of the emperor and his intelligence networks. Historical records suggest that Liang personally oversaw some of the preservation techniques. He studied the methods of preparation, storage, and labeling to ensure that the garden met exacting standards. His involvement reflected the importance he placed on both control and documentation. The Garden of Eyes also influenced provincial behavior indirectly. Knowledge that betrayal could result in such severe measures limited attempts at corruption or disloyal alliances. Officials prioritized accurate reporting and obedience over personal gain. In addition to intelligence officers, certain palace eunuchs were tasked with maintaining the jars. They were responsible for regular inspection, cleaning, and verification of labels. Any deterioration was promptly addressed under imperial directive. Liang's methods were noted for their efficiency. Once a spy was identified and punished, the system immediately updated records, redistributing responsibilities among officials to fill any gaps left by detainment or execution. The emperor's approach emphasized preemptive deterrence. By establishing highly visible consequences, he reduced the likelihood of repeated offenses within his administration. The Garden of Eyes functioned as both a warning and an educational tool for officials. Scholars studying the Han period reference the garden as a unique example of punitive measures tied to centralized intelligence. Liang's combination of surveillance, procedural rigor, and physical punishment represented a distinct approach to governance during the dynasty. Despite its severity, Liang justified the system as necessary for stability. He argued that espionage and disloyalty posed threats to the state that could not be addressed through conventional means. The Garden of Eyes was thus an instrument of what he considered pragmatic governance. Some historical accounts note that Liang occasionally reviewed the names and offenses recorded in the garden personally. These reviews allowed him to refine intelligence networks and assess the effectiveness of punitive methods. The system also evolved over time. New preservation methods, labeling standards, and surveillance techniques were introduced as knowledge increased. Liang's administration adapted continuously to maintain the authority and credibility of the garden. Observers of the period emphasized that the garden's influence extended beyond the palace. Its existence shaped the behavior of regional governors, military leaders, and local magistrates, all of whom adjusted their actions to avoid suspicion. In summary, the Garden of Eyes combined documentation, preservation, and punishment to enforce loyalty. It reflected Emperor Liang's focus on information control and preemptive deterrence. The network of intelligence and surveillance underpinned this system, ensuring that its effects were felt throughout the empire. By the late stage of Liang's reign, the garden had become a central instrument of governance. It was emblematic of the emperor's strategy: absolute oversight, precise documentation, and uncompromising enforcement of loyalty. The foundations laid here set the stage for the eventual historical consequences of such methods. Emperor Liang's methods eventually drew criticism from scholars and officials, particularly for the severity of punishments. While initially effective in enforcing loyalty, the system created fear and resentment within the administration. Provincial governors began to hesitate in making decisions without direct approval. This reliance on central surveillance slowed governance and hindered the responsiveness of local authorities. Liang's overemphasis on monitoring gradually revealed practical limitations. The preservation of eyes in the garden became symbolic of absolute power. While intended as a deterrent, it also generated moral questions among intellectuals and historians. Many debated whether extreme physical punishment was justified to maintain order. Over time, reports suggest some officials attempted to manipulate the surveillance system. They falsified records or redirected accusations to remove rivals. This demonstrated that even the most meticulously controlled system was vulnerable to human manipulation. Emperor Liang's later years were marked by increasing isolation. Court officials were cautious, and few dared challenge him openly. The Garden of Eyes, once a tool of deterrence, contributed to an environment of suspicion and constrained communication. After his death, successors faced decisions regarding the garden. Some preserved it as a cautionary example, while others dismantled portions to avoid public outcry. Historical records indicate that the jars were eventually moved or lost, but the concept remained influential. The garden's legacy persisted in administrative practices. Later, rulers studied Liang's methods as a means of maintaining control over large bureaucracies. Intelligence gathering and documentation techniques in subsequent dynasties were informed by these early experiments. Historians note that Liang's approach highlighted a tension between central authority and local autonomy. His reliance on surveillance demonstrated the benefits of information control, but also revealed the risks of excessive rigidity. In broader social terms, the garden contributed to a climate of caution and self-regulation among officials. Fear of severe consequences ensured compliance, but discouraged initiative and independent problem-solving. The system also left a cultural imprint. Stories and records of the garden circulated in court and scholarly circles, becoming a reference point for discussions about justice, loyalty, and governance ethics. Some scholars argue that the garden influenced legal philosophy by illustrating the extremes of deterrence. It demonstrated how centralized authority could enforce loyalty, but at the cost of morale and trust within the administration. Emperor Liang's reign is now remembered both for administrative efficiency and for the harshness of his punitive measures. The Garden of Eyes remains a historical example of the balance between control and human cost. Modern historians study Liang's reign to understand the complexities of governance during the Han Dynasty. The combination of intelligence networks, documentation, and punishment offers insight into how rulers attempted to consolidate power in large empires.